Hi, this is Dr. Roddy Raban, your host of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about skin cancer, in particular skin cancer of the face, as well as the reconstruction of that skin cancer. I'm so lucky to have one of my dear patients alongside with me, so you definitely want to tune in so you can learn everything you need to know about skin cancer and its repair. Tune in to Plastic Surgery Uncensored. Welcome to another episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. I'm your host, Dr. Roddy Raban, and this week, or this episode, we're going to be talking about skin cancer. And not your traditional conversation about skin cancer, which you can essentially find almost anywhere. We're going to be talking about reconstruction of skin cancer, and particularly reconstruction of skin cancer on your face. So I think this is a really important topic. I am really lucky, very blessed, and I'm accompanied by one of my favorite patients, Bernadette, who I had the lovely pleasure of taking care of. And I think she's going to be a wealth of knowledge for our listeners to learn about the process, because I think until it happens to you, you kind of don't really care. You're like, yeah, skin cancer. But then when it happens to you, it's pretty frightening, and it can be very unsettling. And so I think it's important to have this conversation, just like all the other topics we talk about. And of course, skin cancer falls right in the realm of plastic surgery and aesthetics. So welcome, Bernadette. How are you? I'm great. Thank you for having me. And you're my favorite doctor. You say that to all your podcasts, the people you're on podcasts with. I do not. Okay. Well, it was it's a pleasure having you, and as always, you look stunning, and as always, you are so elegant. So, what we're going to talk about today is, first, I'm just going to talk about skin cancer as a general, and then we'll dive into your journeys particular. So, skin cancer in general comes in a few facets. There are different kinds of skin cancer, but I will just break them up into three major categories. There is basal cell, squamous cell, and melanoma. Of course, there are other ones, but these are the main crux of things. And for the most part, most of them are basal cell. What type of skin cancer did you have? When I saw you, Dr. Raban, I had squamous. Squamous cell. Okay. So depending on the type of skin cancer determines on how aggressive it can be and how it needs to be treated and how much of it needs to be removed. So the basic principle of skin cancer is you get the cancer on your skin, and more often than not, the skin cancer is due to years of sun exposure. And a lot of Bernadette's generation are getting skin cancer because back when they were younger, this idea or notion of sun protection just didn't exist. Much like in my mom's generation for many years, smoking was kind of cool. No one knew until God knows when that it kills you. And sun was the same way. Now my nieces and nephews, they almost look like Eskimos in the sun. They have shirts and creams and lotions and hats. But back in the day, I'm assuming you didn't have much. Nobody was running around with you with SPF 50 putting it all over you. I'm right? Exactly right. And in those days, you were sent to camp, and you may have had a little copper tone, but we just didn't know then about the dangers of the sun. And it was pretty standard that because I'm fair, I would burn, and then I would peel, and then I would burn, and then I would peel. And other than the discomfort, you never thought long term, what does this mean, or what could possibly happen? You said it right on the dot. It's one of those things that you only find out about decades later. So you have young kids and they're running around, they're playing, and you don't think any better. But the reality is that if you don't take care of them, because you can't ask a 10-year-old to be putting on sunscreen. It's a responsibility of a parent, not to suggest your parents by any means did anything wrong. They didn't know any better, but I'm talking to the audience that clearly has the responsibility. If you don't do it, they won't do it. And then when they're 50 or 60 or 70, they're going to be pissed, because unlike your parents' generation who didn't know, today's parents do know. And I think it's probably a little bit reckless not to do it. You wouldn't let your kid run out in the middle of the street. You also shouldn't let your kid run out by the beach without some sun protection. So Exactly. What you said is exactly right. For a lot of people listening, they don't know that you're very fair-skinned, light-eyed, beautifully thin hair. You are the classic person who is set up for skin cancer because you don't have a lot of melanocytes, say someone who is African-American. Right. And that those pigmentary cells kind of protect you from getting burnt, and you are more prone or more apt to get it. So you get the skin cancer, and then the skin cancer needs to be removed. Now, if the skin cancer is on your body, arms, thighs, abdomen, chest, It's pretty straightforward. You just kind of cut it out, and then you cut it out with margins. Margins means you want to cut out the cancer plus extra normal skin, so that you got to make sure that when they look under it under the microscope, all of it was removed. So you're going to take an extra 5 millimeters or a centimeter. And on your thigh, that's not that big a deal. There's a lot of real estate. There's some redundancy. There's some extra. But on your eyelid, or in your instance, on your nose, an extra centimeter is a serious issue. And that is what I refer to as very expensive real estate. That's Rodeo Drive. And on your nose or your eyelid or your lip, every millimeter counts. And as a result, the way we treat skin cancer on the face is different than the way we treat skin cancer on the body. So it was not your first time coming to me because you had had skin cancer previously, which is quite common, right? If you have gotten a lot of burns as a young child, it's not uncommon that that damage, let's say 30 years ago or 40 years ago, it's going to present itself gradually over time. And many of my skin cancer patients, it is their second or third go at it. Not the same place, but a different location. So you had skin cancer twice before?
I had it 3 times, once on my back and then twice on my nose. All 3 of those cases, though, were basal, and they were quite small. But my last case was a squamous cell, and I don't know if you remember, but I ended up with a hole. I think it was like larger than the size of a dime, but just smaller than a nickel. It was pretty extensive real estate, to use your terminology.
Yeah. Oh, I remember it all right, because I remember all of these, because it's a big deal. And so what happens is that the first thing is, let's talk about diagnosis. So if you are an individual and you're living your life and you notice these little scabs on your, most skin cancer presents as an irritated area on your face that you keep kind of like, it doesn't heal and doesn't go away, and kind of it breaks and bleeds a little bit, and kind of you're not sure if you scratched it. And initially you never think about it. But when it's an area that's not healing and is chronically irritated, that's when you need to go get it checked out. Did you say that that's how yours presented?
Yes, in every single situation, it was like that. It was like a little scab, and it was something that constantly itched. And then I would scratch it and it would bleed, and then it would come back again. So it's very apparent whenever I have this situation, because they always follow the same progression.
So you now are a skilled individual, but for the first time listeners in regard to this, it's pretty classic. And what you want to do is just not ignore it forever. Simultaneously, you don't want to freak out every time you have a little something on your face. You want to be smart about it. And so if it's several months that something is not healing, mind you, these skin cancers are not growing at an astronomical pace. They're not going to immediately kill you, and you don't need to be panic stricken, but you certainly have to get your head out of the sand, and you need to be, oh, wow, this thing's kind of not going away. And you need to go see a dermatologist. The dermatologist is your ideal person to go see when and if this is occurring. You may want to go see your family practitioner, but the bottom line is the only way to know what the heck it is to biopsy it.
Right.
Which means take a tiny little sample, send it to the pathologist, look under a microscope. They will come back and tell you, oh, don't worry about it. It's just some sun changes. Oh, it's actinic keratosis. Oh, it's blah, blah, blah. And in your instance, in 2 instances, it came back, rather 3 instances, it came back as basal cell. And the last instance was squamous cell. And so that's how we diagnose it. That's how it happens. So prevention-wise, for those listening, the main key singular way to prevent this is to avoid extreme sun exposure. Period. And every severe burn you get, and you can remember those when you were a child. I remember that summer when I was at camp. I remember that time when I went to the lake with my parents. Those burns are the most traumatic because you're getting the deepest degree of cellular change that alters the DNA of those cells that then presents itself later on. Okay? So we talked about how it happens. We talked about how to prevent it. So if you get it on your body, you can it's pretty straightforward. But if you get it on your face and you notice this thing, you'll go to your dermatologist, and your dermatologist will take a biopsy of it. And then they'll come back and say, hey, Bernadette, it appears as though you have some basal cell. So then the question goes, okay, what do I do at that point? And there's a new, not all that new, but there's a way that we address basal skin cancers on the face. It's called Mohs surgery, Mohs surgery, where they basically, a dermatologist who often is trained specializes in Mohs, although nowadays there's dermatologists who weren't trained but do it anyways, and that's a matter of controversy amongst my dear friends who are true Mohs surgeons. They basically go under a microscope and slowly and gradually keep shaving away this tissue and checking it under the microscope over and over and over and over again. And the objective or the thought process is that they're removing the bare minimum they need to remove in order to get all the cancer out without removing unnecessary expensive real estate.
Correct.
Correct. And so with the nose ones, you did all three of those that way, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So you go in basically and you get numbed up and they just start going at it. And then sometimes you're lucky and it's an hour or two, or sometimes you're unlucky and it's 4 or 5 hours. Right. And the thing about Mohs surgery that's very frightening is that you have no idea what to expect. It's referred to as the iceberg effect. You're just seeing the tip. And you just see this tiny little something and you're thinking to yourself, how bad can this be? And then God forbid you wake up and they're like, yeah, well, this was pretty big. So imagine you go in, you can't see, and they remove layers and layers of cells. And the next thing you know, they give you a mirror and you have, as you had said, between a nickel and a dime size hole on your nose. Yeah. What was that like?
Well, it was scary. And initially you're afraid just when you hear the word cancer, whether it's basal, whether it's squamous, whether it's melanoma, it's all kind of scary. But you can wrap your head around the basal and squamous cell, and you know that if you treat it, you will be okay. So I had done that the first 2 times, and then the third time, because when I had the irritation, I could not tell that that was more severe than my first 2 cases. So I didn't know until I was at the dermatologist and she was coming back, as you said, each time and taking more skin and looking at it under the microscope, that this one was going to be far worse than the other 2. So then you start to worry about, am I going to be disfigured? You know, what's this going to look like? How is this going to heal? And it just presented a whole series of underlying issues, at least the last time, that I did not have the first 2 times.
Right. And the first 2 times they were much smaller. That is the defect. After they removed the cancer, you were left with small areas on your nose, maybe the size of a small razor head or something.
Exactly.
And they were able to close them right there and just put stitches and close them, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this time, when we say a hole, we're not referring to you can see inside your nose, but we're referring to full thickness skin removal. That means the entirety of the skin. So what's underneath there? Cartilage. You're looking at the base of the nose, and that's pretty significant. So they hand you a mirror, I'm assuming, or did they let you take a look at yourself?
No, I don't think I really saw it until I got home and I took off the bandages. Okay. And then I knew it was more severe. My dermatologist had offered to be able to close it up. She had closed up the last 2, but I just didn't feel that this was the kind of situation that I could entrust with her as much as I loved her and she's my friend. I just knew, and I did some research on the internet, that having had prior surgeries on my nose, that there were more risks involved. And then that's when I started searching.
Yeah, okay, excellent. So this is kind of where the junction is that we need to kind of pause and slow down and explain. So first thing is you notice some area that's not healing. You don't ignore it. You go see your dermatologist. Your dermatologist does a biopsy. Biopsy comes back as one of the following things. God willing, it's not melanoma, which is a whole animal of its own, but we'll just leave it to the most common. They schedule you for a Mohs surgery. You go in. Of course, you nor your dermatologist can anticipate what's going to happen because they never know. And then when it's all done, you have a defect or an area that's missing. And depending on the size of it, its location, and its complexity will then determine everything that goes on afterwards. So when we come back from this break, I'm going to talk about what happens when you have this hole in your nose. What are your options? What you chose to do, what other people choose to do, and how to go about it. Because obviously you're a beautiful woman and there's no reason why this should have altered your life as dramatically as potentially it could have. And so we want to have that conversation when we come back from this break. All right, guys, let's tune in. We'll be right back with Plastic Surgery Uncensored. All right, welcome back to Plastic Surgery Uncensored. I'm your host, Dr. Roddy Raban. I am accompanied by my dear patient, Bernadette, and we were just about to get to the kind of exciting part, the nerve-wracking part is, okay, so Bernadette, so my question is, it is quite customary that when you have skin cancer removal by a surgeon, a Mohs surgeon, that nowadays those surgeons, which wasn't, by the way, the case years ago, whatever defect there was on your body, whoever it was that created it would send you to a plastic surgeon. So if your general surgeon made a hole, if your orthopedist made a hole, if your dermatologist made a hole, they would send you to a plastic surgeon to have it reconstructed, hence the word plastic and reconstructive surgery. Nowadays, for a number of reasons, those own specialties started to kind of say, well, what do I need to send this to a plastic surgeon? I'm a surgeon. I can fix this myself. So the orthopedist, the dermatologist, the OBGYN, the whoever, they started doing the reconstruction of their own defects. I, as a board-certified, highly trained plastic surgeon, would argue that while that is acceptable, I don't believe that it's necessarily always optimal. Maybe it is efficient, maybe it is easy, but I don't necessarily know that their skill set is comparable to that of someone incredibly well-trained in reconstruction. And I think the very minimum is patients need to be given an option. I don't care if a patient and a doctor decide together that, hey, listen, I'm your OB, I'm your dermatologist, I'm going to fix this hole, and your patient and the patient is given the option, or I could send you to see a plastic surgeon, and the patient says, you know what, doc, go ahead and do it. I'm fine with that. Because again, the patient is aware. What I don't like is when patients feel as though that's their only option, or misled to think that this person is necessarily the best trained or the only trained person to do it, and then only later find out like, well, crap, I could have had it done otherwise. So I commend you, because that's why I wanted you to have this conversation with me, because you had already had 2 small Mohs surgeries. You already had the dermatologist close, which today is now the commonplace. The commonplace is you go in, you do your Mohs, it's got a defect, and the Mohs surgeon will close it for you right there on the spot. And they probably do an okay job in most of the instances. The next level is they have a plastic surgeon that's physically there. They do 5 or 6 Mohs surgeries in the day. There's a plastic surgeon that's with them in that group, and he is the closer, he or she. And basically all the defects, they close that day, which is a notch better than, in my opinion, the one previous. The problem is you don't get to choose. That plastic surgeon is the one that's selected for you by the dermatologist in that group. And you don't know if there's a financial relationship, if this person is the best educated to do it. You haven't had a chance to look at their work. You haven't had a chance. Now, you feel highly pressured because you have this hole in your nose and you're freaking out. And they're saying, well, we could fix it for you right now, or you can go wander the streets with this hole on your nose. So it's no surprise the majority of patients just have them close it, and it works. Question is it always the most optimal outcome? So how did you know to right there not just let her close it? I mean, you have this now dime. Now, I want people to envision this. You have a dime on your nose, on a nose. That's like huge. And, you know, this lady's telling you, who you've operated with before, hey, let me just fix it. And something inside of you says, what did you know going in that how did you know?
No, I think going in, I just assumed that she would fix it. But I think when I saw the extent of the tissue that had to be removed, it was just something in my gut. And you just brought me back to that feeling. I can just remember being scared. And I knew it wasn't the best time to make that important decision feeling scared, that I should like take a breath and regroup and look at my options, because I knew that what wasn't of paramount importance was closing it immediately, that I did have the luxury of time to make that decision, to make sure that I didn't make the wrong decision.
Did she tell you that? Did you know that? Because I got to tell you, what you just said is very important. Majority of patients are told or assume that having this defect on your nose. Oh my God, it's going to get infected. I need to close it immediately. How can I leave this open? How did you know that you're not going to leave it there for months, but you certainly are under no pressure right there and there to close it? How did you know that?
She was great. She told me that. I mean, I think she knew me, and she knew that I don't panic easily, and I have a lot of trust in her. And so the fact that I had these reservations, I think she respected that. But when you're sitting there and you go through this process, which is really frightening anyway, and then you are faced with making a decision, maybe she'll need to do a skin graft. And I'm like, do you have the capability to do a skin graft right here in your office? And she's like, of course I can do that. And then she starts diagramming how she would close up the hole. And it was just really frightening and very overwhelming. And I just felt like I wasn't in the right spot to make the decision at that point in time. And I remember coming back home and thinking about it and consulting some of my friends who I then brought with me to my appointments with you. And they helped me attack this. And they're like, well, let's find the best plastic surgeon we can find and ask his opinion or her opinion. And in our case, it was you. It led us to you by a few phone calls. And one of the first things that I liked, which I didn't know, is you started talking to me about underlying issues. In my case, because I had multiple surgeries, it was the tissue healing. Was there going to be risk of blood flow to the tissue? And was that going to impact how well the skin was going to heal? And so that was something that you spent a lot of time talking to me about and explaining. And so I just knew that I was in the right hands when someone was giving me the pros and cons of the surgery itself and not just the options.
Excellent. So I think what you have demonstrated, and the reason why we're having this conversation, number one, it is not to suggest that a dermatologist cannot close your incision. That's not the purpose. It is not to suggest that the plastic surgeon that a dermatologic group uses is not capable or will do a great job. It is to know that you have options, and that option is that there is no state of emergency that says that you are not allowed to take a moment to investigate and perhaps find the best person for you. In some instances, people are like, I don't want to go home with this thing. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. I trust you. Do it. Great. And that probably works in the overwhelming majority of people. But for people who are calm and cool and say, hey, let me think about this for a second. I think you will find there are lots of other options. And in your instance, perhaps a better option. Because I do think that the defect that you had was at a high level of skill that couldn't just be skin grafted. If you would have had a skin graft, which we're going to get into right now, you basically have a patch on your nose that you could see from 655 miles away. So I think that it speaks volumes of you. And I think that's the key for people to understand, that if they're going in to get a Mohs surgery, understand that you can consider at some point an alternative option to the reconstruction. So let's just talk about reconstruction as a whole, because I think that's important. So what does that all mean? It means that you have a defect, something is missing, they removed a bunch of skin, it's in the Petri dish, and now you need to fix it. So option number one, we call it the reconstructive ladder, which means we start with the easiest thing to do and work our way up more complex. You don't just find the most complex solution for an easy problem. That's just bad. You find the easiest solution for the problem that will get you the best outcome. So the first thing is, if you have a tiny little defect, you just leave it alone and let it heal on its own. And the body will close it down and make scar tissue that you may not notice is even there. That's easy. You just put some wound care on there and let it put some salve and the thing closes. Right. That works, but very specific places and not for a lot of places. Next is you just close it. You actually put stitches and bring it together. So something's missing, we removed it, and you basically move the remaining tissue together. And again, that works in some places, but not on expensive real estate like your nose that doesn't want to move, or your eyelids or your lips. So not always the best. The next option is skin graft. Ooh, that sounds like it's going to work. A skin graft is essentially borrowing skin from somewhere else and sticking it in the hole that's missing. That skin can be taken at a very thin level or a very thick level, but you're borrowing skin And often for the face, it's from in front of the ear or behind the ear or the neck. You want to borrow skin that's similar in quality. You don't really want to borrow skin from your belly, for example, because the belly skin and your nose skin are different. But what you'll notice immediately is, wow, the nose skin is so unique. It's thick, it's sebaceous, it has contours, and the skin in front of my ear is like thin like paper. And so while you can do that to close, and it can work, it does close the hole, but then imagine you literally have a patch. You can see the color difference. There's no way that blends in like your own nose. And of course, you can put on makeup and cover it, but it's never going to be the same. So the final way to repair a defect is the most sophisticated way, which is what we call soft tissue rearrangement or local tissue transfer, which means you steal from Paul to pay Peter. What the hell does that mean? In your face, there are areas where there is redundancy, extra skin. For example, in your nose, if you pinch the bridge of your nose, pinch it, you will notice that there is some laxity, some redundancy at the bridge of your nose. If you pinch your tip, you'll notice there is zero redundancy. So what you do with this tissue transfer is you move tissue from where there is extra and shift it over into where there is less. And so what we did for you ultimately was exactly that. We used your own nose skin and borrowed, but not cut off, but rotated skin from your bridge of your nose and brought it into the tip of your nose, such that your nose was reconstructed with its own tissue in such a way that when it healed, it is almost imperceptible to the naked eye, except for very close observation.
Well, even I have to tell you, Dr. Raban, I have those makeup mirrors with all those lights and that intensity, and I can barely see my scar to this day. And even within a year, it was just imperceptible. It's smooth to the touch. It's no longer red in any way. And I just think you yourself, you're a very gifted surgeon. And so you repaired it and you made it as good as what it had been before. You restored it. So
well, I appreciate that. You're a kind human being, and nothing makes me happier. But I think the key is also, one is knowing, and then also execution. I mean, you know, anyone can, not anyone, but there will be a lot of people who can do what we did, but maybe I treat it like a facelift or a rhinoplasty. I bring you into the operating room. I take an hour or two to do it. I make a big production. But most surgery reconstruction is done under local in the office. It's done quickly. Remember, it's a high volume thing. There's hundreds of patients across the, thousands of older people who have these skin cancers, and you just knock them out and move on. And at the end, does it really matter? Maybe not. But in someone like you who's young and pretty, and it's in the middle of your nose, maybe that's the instance for you to pull your ace or your wild card and say, hey, wait. This one, let me think about this one. And that's the purpose of today's dialogue. It's just so people know they have alternatives and options, and that they don't have to be pressured into thinking that it's just the only option. And that's the truth. And you look amazing as always.
Well, I'm so grateful. And I just have to say, not just you, but your entire staff, as I remember, Sally and everyone in your office, they're just very warm and comforting and professional. And they just made the process from beginning to end so easy. Because I recall I had to come back and we were monitoring the tissue to make sure that it was healing and the blood flow was strong. And with each visit, your staff couldn't have been any nicer than what they were.
Well, we're all here to help you. I mean, that's what we're here for. If you don't like helping people, then, I mean, I don't know, be a toll booth operator. You definitely don't go into a service industry, you waitress, bartender, nurse, office manager, when you don't like people. No less people who are struggling, no less people who are scared, no less people that are anxious. I mean, it's just dumb. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who pick the wrong profession. So we've worked very hard to select people that love people and want to help people and can tolerate people going through a very difficult journey. At any rate, I think this was a very useful segment. I am certain that people listening will be eye-opened and are grateful that you jumped on this podcast and helped us tackle a very important subject matter. As always, it's great to see you and actually physically see you as opposed to hear you. And
thank you. Thank you for having me and reaching out, and I really appreciate it.
Well, it was a pleasure. At any rate, this is yet another amazing episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. Please join us next week for another episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored. I'm your host, Dr. Roddy Raban. Be well.